Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the podcast that looks at the money behind the beautiful game, with me, Kevin Day, an expert in football finance at Liverpool University, Kieran Maguire. Morning, Kieran.
Morning, Kevin. How the devil are you?
We've got no time for small talk this morning, Kieran, because we have a lot to get through. It's questions day, but we've got some news to discuss first. I mean, we could just drop a couple of questions, Kieran, but that's not how we work. We're a public service, so I like to think some of that 8 p.m. applause on the doorstep was actually for us. So, first big news story. Congratulations, of course, to Liverpool, if not to some of their fans. But winning the league, I'm told, Kieran, may actually cost them money.
Yes, whilst the Premier League is paved with gold to a certain extent in terms of extra money coming in, winning the Premier League won't necessarily have brought Liverpool huge reward. So they do get an extra £2.5 million per place. So therefore, compared to last year, that's if we ignore the COVID issues, an extra £2.5 million for being first as opposed to second. There will be some sponsor bonuses, but I don't think they're necessarily be huge. And as you may have seen with the likes of Jurgen Klopp and some of the players being interviewed already, their Premier League Champions 2019-20 merchandise has already gone on sale. So there's extra money coming in. But then you start to look at the extra money going out. And I think player bonuses will more than eat up most of that extra prize money. And then Jurgen Klopp himself is likely to have a significant bonus. If you take a look at Claudio Ranieri for when Leicester won the Premier League in 2016, he got £5 million for bringing them the Premier League trophy. And of course, Leicester were quite happy to sign off on that when they were negotiating his contract because, like the rest of the planet, they never thought it was going to take place.
Yeah.
So that's the player side of things. But then it transpires that Liverpool, of course, have recruited many players and they've recruited extremely well. And there will be sell-on clauses and bonus clauses, even. Clauses, yeah. I don't know what happened there, and I'm the sober one.
I was going to say, imagine what you'd be like with a hangover.
So if we look at Southampton, they've sold to Liverpool Mane, Virgil van Dijk, and Adam Lallana. And I think Adam Lallana's issue is the most intriguing because his contract was due to expire on the 30th of June. So if Liverpool had won the Premier, so if Manchester City, for example, had won the match on Thursday against Chelsea, and if Lallana had not extended his contract for a month, it could have been the case that Liverpool would have won the Premier League in the first week in July, and they wouldn't have to go and pay however many. It's likely to be hundreds of thousands, if not more, to Southampton for one of the add-on clauses in his contract. So it all starts to get very small print, but you put those two things together. In the form of player bonuses and fees due to other clubs, and clearly the likes of Arsenal with Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain and so on, they'll all be having a slice of that. So it's not just Liverpool who would have been celebrating them winning the Premier League on Thursday night.
All right, so what you're saying basically is that Palace's resolute refusal to challenge for the Premier League trophy title is actually a wise financial decision.
Yes. I mean, it certainly was when Arsenal were under Wenger, and they were more than happy to finish fourth or third. And Spurs got it absolutely right last season. They got to the Champions League final, didn't win it, and finished in the top four. So, in terms of minimising your bonuses, that was very, very clever of them.
Now, I'm going to take you up on something there, Kieran, which I don't often do, especially when we're pushed for time. We could do a 3-hour pod, Kieran, but let's face it, a lot of people would have gone by the end of it. But we are a little bit pushed for time, and I've just used more time by telling you we're pushed for time. But do you genuinely think that it was Arsene Wenger's policy to finish third or fourth, as some Arsenal fans who defended would have you think? Because it seems to me that that was more of a handy excuse for saying we're not actually good enough, or we're not going to spend money. Do you think it's a deliberate thing? Like, as long as we get in the Champions League, that's fine?
No. He would have wanted to win trophies because we all want to get as far in our careers as we can, and also the emotional achievement.
That ship has sailed, isn't it?
For both of us.
Oh, crikey. It's Sunday afternoon. I'm in my shed and you're in your... Never mind. Carry on.
Arsene Wenger would have wanted to win trophies. The reason why Arsenal finished third or fourth was actually that he was quite hamstrung by the budget that he was given by the club. So Arsenal never really had, apart from the years when they had the Invincibles, they had that incredible squad. When that squad started to age and needed replacing with players of the same calibre, Arsenal simply weren't in a position to go out into the market and recruit.
Yeah. Okay, now further down the table, the National League playoffs are happening, but again, there are some big financial risks involved. You know, one week, Kieran, what would be nice is if all our stories were, hopefully, every club has plenty of money. That would be great, wouldn't it? But then that would probably be the last pod we ever did. But so what are the financial risks of the playoffs happening?
Well, if you take a look at the 6 clubs involved in the National League playoffs, so we've got Barnet, Boreham Wood, Halifax, Harrogate, Notts County and Yeovil. Those clubs have... They had players whose contracts expired on the 30th of April. Remember when we spoke to Lee Worgan from Dover, and he was explaining that the National League does finish earlier. So therefore, what they had to do is to effectively put the players into some quasi form of hibernation through the furlough scheme, then take them out of furlough. But some of the players have moved on. Some of the players, because of the uncertainty, have either said, we're looking for other jobs. We've taken a transfer elsewhere. So we've got the costs of taking those players out of furlough. They've got the costs of putting them into training. And most of the clubs, I think, only went into training last Monday. But some of those clubs, Harrogate have only got a squad of 17 left, because players have gone elsewhere. I think Barnet have got even fewer than that. So all this talk about football integrity. Well, my pronunciation is terrible to say. Football integrity and a level playing field has gone out of the window because Notts County they've got new owners from Denmark, and they are desperate to get back into the EFL. And this is all fine, and the National League playoffs are going to take place between the 18th and the 30th of July by all accounts. And the winner of the playoffs has got no guarantee that they are going to be promoted. So it could be a competition which is watched by nobody, which takes place at Wembley before nobody.
Yeah.
You then go, I've won this sort of new this particular activity, but unless the National League itself has a full season returning next season, the EFL have said, well, we're not going to accept because we are not willing to have 25 teams in League Two next season.
But I don't see how they would have, because we're short of Bury anyway, so they wouldn't have. I don't see the maths there.
Well, Barrow, remember, have won the.
Of course, I beg your pardon.
So
of course, they have. We're talking about the playoffs. Yes, of course.
And what's due to happen is that Stevenage are due to be relegated unless the EFL or Stevenage themselves appeal against Macclesfield's points deduction. We don't know what's happening there. So are Stevenage going to go down? Are they going to be replaced by one of these 6 clubs who are all going to incur substantial costs? Remember, we've got the COVID testing costs as well.
Yes, of course, yeah.
It just seems to be a huge fog. And I appreciate, as we all do, that there are far bigger issues taking place today. But this is a football finance podcast, and these clubs are putting themselves at financial risk in going in for this competition.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that one. I mean, I think it's beholden. I mean, the EFL need to make a decision before the playoffs take place. I mean, that's the ludicrous notion. I mean, because I feel as well for Harrogate and Boreham Wood, no disrespect to Notts County and Barnet, but I get very excited by the notion of a new team getting into the league. And the idea of someone like Boreham Wood or Harrogate being in the league is a fantastic one. So it'd be awful if it was snatched away from them in probably the only season they're ever going to get a chance to do it. And before we move on, just take a breath, Kieran, get your pronunciation sorted out, because you can't be saying things wrong on Sky Sports. later on, which is one of the reasons we're a little bit pushed for time. Now, Juventus and Barcelona have agreed an eye-catching swap deal, and I'm slightly disappointed by this because I really wanted Arthur to go to Man United, because the idea of a midfield that comprised Fred and Arthur was beyond my childish imagination. But it looks like it's not going to happen. But it's an odd thing to say about a swap deal, but it's a kind of big money swap deal, isn't it?
It's a big money swap deal on paper, which appears to generate between 50 and 60 million euros worth of profit for both clubs, who just happen to be in need of 50 to 60 million euros of profit to comply with financial fair play.
Not really.
So as usual, it's our silver-tongued friends in the accounting world. There's these two players. So Arthur is 24. He's a decent player.
Yeah.
I don't think he's necessarily ripping up trees. And they're swapping him for, my pronunciation might be wrong on this one, is it Pjanic?
Pjanic. Apparently.
From Juve. Now, he's 30 and he's apparently worth 60 million euros. So that seems a pretty high price. But we have sort of vaguely discussed this in the past. When a player is sold, all of the profits are taken in the year of sale. But when you buy a player, they spread the cost of that transfer over a number of years via our old friend amortization.
Yeah.
So therefore, what this allows both Juve and Barcelona to do is to take a big profit. If those players had gone for 30 million and 10 million, there'd still be ultimately a 20 million cash payment from Juve to Barcelona, but they wouldn't have booked as much profit, and therefore it wouldn't have counted as much towards FFP. It's a bit like me and you swapping a couple of books. And I say, the net cost is £5. I'm going to charge you £100 for my book, and you're going to charge me 105 for yours. And we both know that's complete bollocks.
Well, no, if you told me to do it, I'd just go along with it, to be perfectly honest. But so what you're implying is that this is not a case of the manager or the technical director of a football club saying, this player would be a useful addition to our squad. You're implying that this is a clear ploy, basically. So someone between these two clubs has come up with this idea, probably over a socially distanced coffee somewhere, and this is happening purely for financial reasons. Because if that's the case, it's a very cynical thing to do, isn't it, to two young men's careers, essentially? Yeah, albeit they're going to good clubs, both of them.
Yeah, I think there must have been approval from the coach. I don't think this would have been done without the coach's approval. I just think that the values, and we might see more of this in terms of player swaps at unusually high values. Certainly if you take a look at Mkhitaryan and Alexis Sanchez, that swap seemed to go through at pretty high values for two players who were effectively stinking out their particular clubs at the time. And that allows the clubs to book a profit on the deal as to instead of booking a loss. And that's where my concern is. Is it illegal? No, it's not. But is it unusual? Do I feel comfortable with it? Certainly not either.
Well, if you don't feel comfortable with something, Kieran, then there's definitely something fishy going on. You might have to explain that £105 book thing again to me sometime off air, because I was having a big swig of tea at the time, and this is why I couldn't come up with a better answer. But now, final news story before we get on to some very interesting questions. According to the PFA, the EFL plans for a salary cap may be unlawful. And for new listeners, that's the Professional Footballers Association, the English Football League, and unlawful. And it might be worth some of you looking up the difference between illegal and unlawful. Illegal, Kieran, as you know, means you're basically sanctioned. You're not allowed to do it, and unlawful means there's no law that says you can do it, basically. So the PFA are not happy with the EFL plans for a salary cap.
That's right. By all accounts, the proposals at EFL meetings that we're going to have a championship cap of 16 to 18 million, League One 2.5, League Two 1.25. If that was the case, and we take a look at last year's sets of accounts, it would have been only Millwall, Rotherham and Bolton who would have been below that particular cap of 18 million. And if you think that 2 of those clubs were subsequently relegated, that just leaves Millwall, and God bless my old uncle in respect of being one of their lads in terms of that. So it's going to be a real challenge. And the PFA have said, well, hold on, there's always talk about the salary cap. Nobody's talking to us. We're not happy about it because clearly it has implications for our members. They've pointed at the breaches of salary caps by Saracens in rugby union and rugby league as well. And their argument, and this is something which we have been banging on about, is why don't we get more transparency from the clubs themselves, because they're not publishing full accounts. So therefore, are they just claiming to be poverty stricken, but they're not themselves prepared to give full details as to the nature of their finances? The PFA also says it would discourage investment by potential new owners who wouldn't be able to go into a club, spend money on it in terms of signing players on big wages and taking the clubs forwards. So in general, they're clearly unhappy about this, and it looks like it's going to be a spat between the PFA and the EFL, or rather, perhaps we should say another spat between the PFA and the EFL.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that if your Uncle Terry was still with us, he would probably find some imaginative financial ways to sort Millwall out, I'm guessing. And when I say Uncle Terry's not still with us, I mean he's died. He's not in Parkhurst. But it does lead us nicely into the reason we're here, which is questions. As I get quite confusionated when we do news stories on Questions Day. But the first question is from Andrew Watt, and it's about the salary cap. And you've mentioned the figures in the Championship and who complies in the Championship. But Andrew Watt is more interested in League One and League Two. As you said, 2.5 million potential salary cap in League One, 1.25 million in League Two. Andrew wants to know who the winners and losers in those divisions would be and how many clubs are complying with those figures in those leagues.
Well, the losers would be the players.
Right, yeah, okay, fair enough.
So the winners would be the owners. Would it increase the chances of fewer clubs going into insolvency? Yes, it would. The average wage bill in League One at present is 7.5 million. Now that is skewed a bit by having Sunderland in that division, but even so, if you took Sunderland out, I think we'd still be looking at around about 5.5 to 6 million in League One. In League Two, the average for the clubs that do publish wage information, and remember, over half of them don't, the average wage bill there was 3.4 million compared to a capped figure of 1.25. Now, remember that the wage bills that we are seen being quoted are for the whole club, and I think that the caps that the EFL are perhaps referring to are for playing staff only. But you and I have both discussed this on a few occasions, that sometimes what goes into the players' pot and the non-players' pot can be a little bit grey.
Yes, yeah. We talked about in potential kitmen. I think Andrew was probably referring to which clubs would be winners and losers rather than whether it's players and owners. Perhaps it's best to answer that question from Andrew by saying how many clubs in League One and League Two are within that figure at the moment.
Well, none. This is
no,
as
right,
simple as
okay.
that. It's. I think Accrington in League One will be close to it, and that's probably about it as far as I can make out. But
sorry, in which case, who's come up with these figures? Then has somebody worked out that these would be the most likely figures to keep clubs solvent? I mean, are these just, we've talked recently about plucking fingers. I've caught it from you now, Kieran. I was a perfectly articulate broadcaster until that 10 minutes ago. We talked about the EFL plucking figures from a random number generator. I mean, is this what's happened again?
Well, it could be that they've tried to work out, they looked at the collective losses. So in League One, the clubs lost £46 million between them last season, and only 5 clubs out of 24 made a profit. So perhaps they've taken the total wage bill, worked out how much if we knocked off 46 million, and that works out as an average wage bill of 2.5 million that would be our target. But it's going to cause huge issues for those clubs that have players who are on 2 or 3 year contracts at amounts which would bust those budgets. And as we both know, I think we would have a real legal minefield under those circumstances.
And what's fascinating? So there's of the 71 clubs outside the Premier League currently until Barrow comes in. Of those 71 clubs, only 4 of them are actually complying with the figures for the salary caps and the chat. And that leaves a lot of clubs with a lot of problems, doesn't it, as you say? And has anyone talked about a timescale for this to be implemented? Would clubs have 3 years in which to implement the salary cap? Because they wouldn't be able to do it immediately, would they, because of those contracts?
Well, I agree with you entirely. It would have to be a graduated introduction of the rules, because otherwise clubs would be in breach of contract with players, or they'd have to get rid of the players effectively on freeze, which isn't in their interests. Ultimately, we're all here as football fans, and I'm not sure that fans are particularly bothered if the wage bills are high, if the club gets promoted, and you've got an owner who's willing to back that. So, trying to work out the logic behind all of this. Salary caps working in closed leagues where there's no alternative. So that's why it works in the NFL and the NBA. It's far more complex when you've got issues of promotion and relegation. And also, if you take a look at that average wage bill of 18 million being set in the Championship, it's around about 160 million in the Premier League. So you're not going to attract good players to the Championship who can then move up. And that means sort of the yo-yo effect could be accelerated as a result of this.
Now, just briefly, because as you know, my job on this show is professional idiot. For those people who are working on the same level of intellectual financial accountancy as I, why is it more sensible? Why do salary caps work in the NFL and NBA rather than in the Premier League?
Because the players have got nowhere else to go. Right. If you're playing in the NFL and you're not happy with your salary, you don't really have much of a choice when you're traded to begin with. But if you are unhappy with your salary in the Championship, you can go and play in Belgium. You can go and play in France. So unless that cap is going to be across the whole of Europe, then it could lead to a talent drain. That's certainly what we have seen in the Aviva Premiership in rugby. Lots of players have left playing club rugby in England to go and play in France, where there wasn't a salary cap. I think many England players included, until the English Rugby Union said, well, if you go abroad, you can't play for us, which just seems equally churlish.
Okay, well, Guy, our producer, seems to have been taking the efficiency pills this week, because the next question actually follows on from the one we just had. So that's 2 questions in a row that follow on, which is an unprecedented level of organisational skill for this pod. It's a question from Liam Jones. And basically, Liam says, could you talk, as you have done a little bit, in that salary cap question, could you talk about the difference in finances between clubs in League One? Because there is a vast discrepancy in some of the size of those clubs. And Liam asks, as a Shrewsbury Town fan, and for the benefit of the edit, Liam asks, as a Shrewsbury Town fan, who is led to believe that he should be quite proud of how his club is run financially. Also, he should be quite proud of the fact that it's the club with the only Latin chant when Shrewsbury fans start singing "Sail Up, Sail Up." That always makes me laugh. So first of all, are Shrewsbury Town a financially well-run club? And secondly, talk a little bit about the discrepancy between, as you said, you've got Sunderland in that division and you've got much, much smaller clubs.
Shrewsbury are an extremely well-run club. They've been profitable for the last 4 years. I don't think there's many clubs in the lower 2 divisions that can say that with the same degree of pride. And therefore, I think they're very much a template. When I've spoken to executives from other clubs, they say what they want to be is Rotherham or Burton or Shrewsbury, because I think those clubs are sort of laid a laid a path for showing that you can be financially sustainable. You can break even every year. The owner's not having to put money in, and at the same time, they've got into the playoffs. They've done pretty well, and their development of players has been excellent as well, which it encourages more players to sign for them because they see them as a pathway to improving their careers as well.
That's interesting. So how would that compare to a Sunderland, for example, in that division?
Well, if you take a look at Shrewsbury, their income was £5.5 million last season. Sunderland's was 59.
Wow.
So they're a tenth of the size. Now Sunderland did have the benefit of some parachute payments, but even so, Shrewsbury are bottom half in terms of income generating, and that's that division next season. You'll again have Ipswich and Portsmouth, Shrewsbury. Potentially Charlton could be back down there again. Yeah. There's some pretty decent sized clubs with decent sized followings.
Hull City, Middlesbrough,
it'll be an interesting division as they all are, but it's going to be tough for a club of Shrewsbury to compete. But you've got to give them credit for doing so. Remember, they held Liverpool to a 2-2 draw this season in the FA Cup, so they're clearly no mugs on the pitch as well. Yeah,
you sounded confused there, Kieran. Before anyone tweets, I know Hull City and Middlesbrough are in the Championship, but they're in danger of relegation to League One. So that's my point. There's going to be some big clubs down there. Now, you'll like this question, Kieran, because it's a very nice, specific. Neither of us could do words again this morning. This is ludicrous. A nice, specific question for you. Now, Tony McNeary says, according to Manchester United's third quarter results, so you've got all sorts of people looking out for third quarter results now. Man United said the postponement of their away game against Spurs cost them £4 million in lost revenue. And basically, Tony wants to know how, because United wouldn't have shared in any gate receipts, would they? So how is it that they've said that's cost them £4 million?
Yeah, I took a look at United's third quarter result. I didn't see this myself. I think they were saying that their home games are going to cost them on average $4 million in terms of lost gate receipts. As Tony correctly said, under the way that the clubs agreed, and I think this is where football started to lose some of its magic for me, that clubs could keep all of the home gate receipts. Spurs would certainly be in the £4 million per match bracket themselves.
Right.
And I think Spurs will probably be hit harder than most because, remember, they've also got that NFL contract, which has now been cancelled. So that's cost them millions on top of that. They had concerts planned and so on. But I don't think Manchester United will have lost anything from that match being cancelled, apart from if they've pre-booked a night in a hotel and the hotel won't give them a refund. But it shouldn't have cost them anything more than that.
Okay, we'll have another look at that, just for my sake and for Tony's sake. Do have another look. And of course, if it's any consolation to Spurs, they spent all that money on those giant NFL dressing rooms, but at least they've got 2 tunnels. So in this situation, they're fine. Who thought a season ago that you'd need 2 tunnels? Well done, Tottenham, for looking ahead. Christian Booth. Now, Christian's got an interesting question, and it's something we have touched on, but I think this is an interesting clarification, if you like, because Christian quite rightly points out that the prospect of a European Super League is looming ever closer. How much revenue would it generate? Could it rival the NFL, for example? And this is the interesting part in particular, would Premier League clubs and clubs that are in the Champions League regularly gain less than maybe sort of well-run clubs in Germany? So would Borussia Dortmund, say, make more money out of a Super League than Liverpool would? Or more extra money, perhaps?
Yeah. A lot will depend, if the Super League does take place, as to what happens domestically. If we have a European Super League which results in Bayern, Dortmund, Manchester United, Liverpool, Chelsea, Barcelona, Real Madrid, clubs of that calibre, if they resign their positions from the Premier League and the Bundesliga and La Liga, it means that they will also lose access to the money from those leagues. And last season, the TV deal for the Premier League generated £3 billion compared to the Champions League 1.75. So your first gut reaction is that they wouldn't be better off financially, but clearly, and what we're looking at here is the D-Day is 2024-25, because that's when the present Champions League format is up for renewal. I would imagine that a Super League consisting solely of those clubs would be able to sell the rights for more than we're presently getting in the Premier League. The downside of that, and I think this is the very good point that's been raised by Christian, is the Premier League clubs do extremely well because they finish at the top of the Premier League. And therefore, as we know, they're going to get the lion's share of the money. There's no guarantee that Chelsea are going to finish in the top 4 of this Super League every year. And if the money is distributed in a similar manner to what we see at present in the Premier League, in that it's very much geared towards which position you are in the table, I mean, clearly all of those matches would be televised. I think that's a given. Then the Premier League clubs, if they don't have a good season, could find themselves worse off financially. Whereas a club such as Dortmund, the Bundesliga TV deal is only worth £1 billion a year. I think that a club of that nature would be better off financially, as would PSG, because the French TV deal isn't particularly lucrative. So very much there would be winners and losers. And I think the biggest losers would be not just the Premier League clubs which up and take sticks. Does that make sense? Which up and leave the Premier League, but also, of course, the remaining 14 clubs. But because with the best will in the world, and I know it hurts us as fans of clubs such as Palace and Brighton, we're not the reason why people tune in.
Clubs such as Brighton, I think, is what you meant to say there, Kieran. But you're absolutely right. Do you know what? Talking about fans of clubs like Palace and Brighton, I'd be interested to ask our listeners who support the Barcelonas, the Liverpools, the Real Madrids, especially those people who are in those countries, who are in Spain and Italy and around the world, what their appetite for a European Super League is. Because it seems to me that if Palace, for example, were in the European Super League, once the novelty of that first away trip to Barcelona was worn off, and you think, I've got to go there every season, and then you start including the trips to Dynamo Kiev, because they're in the European Super League, it's making life much more difficult for fans, isn't it? I mean, for broadcasters, it's absolutely perfect. For the clubs, it's absolutely perfect. For the fans, it's not so perfect. And I'm guessing that clubs like Barcelona and Real Madrid wouldn't worry about that, because they know that they would get 3,000 tourists to fill the away end anyway if 3,000 Man United fans can't afford to go on a regular basis.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. But I mean, the attitude of the owners towards fans has, for the last 25 years or so, is we've made a decision, grab your ankles, and that's about as far as it goes. There is no decision. No fan ever said, wouldn't it be a great idea if Premier League football matches took place at 8:00 on a Monday or 5:30 on a Saturday? Yeah. So, fans' views are an irrelevance as far as the decision makers are concerned. Yeah,
I get a bit confused when you say you absolutely agree with me. So I'm always waiting for it. It's like when Captain Mainwaring, when Sergeant Wilson says he agrees with him, he looks slightly confused. Now, our next question is from Nobby Clark. And I think I might know Nobby vaguely. I think Nobby might be a friend of a friend. He might be a friend of my mate Frank Talking, which is not his real name. His real name's Uncle Barry, but that's South London for you. Now, Nobby has a slightly morbid but very, very interesting question, I think. And as Nobby says, we've talked a lot about super rich owners like Abramovich on this pod, who lend clubs large sums of money, which are more often than not converted to shares or similar, to avoid having to pay them back to prevent the clubs going into financial meltdown. But after the Leicester owner was killed in that terrible helicopter crash in 2018, his family were happy to continue his good work. But, says Nobby, what would happen if a club owner died and his beneficiaries decided that they wanted to cash out, that they had no interest in football, didn't want the Premier League football club? Would or could executors be compelled to recall all loans? Which you read that question first of all and you think, oh, well, it's a bit specific, but it's actually quite possible, isn't it?
Very much so, because if you take a look at the value of some of the loans by owners, we are talking hundreds of millions of pounds, and a loan ultimately has an obligation to the party, to the football club, and the beneficiaries of the estate could certainly call in that obligation. Effectively meaning that the club would have to put it up for sale, up for sale to try to find a new owner, and hoping that new owner would pay off those loans. The advantage of shares is that shares exist in perpetuity. In the sense that once the club has issued them, there is no commitment to buy them back. So we are seeing some owners quite regularly convert loans into shares when they feel that they no longer need the nuclear scenario of having at some point to demand the money back. But the total for loans from owners is probably in the region of around about £2 billion. As far as Premier League clubs are concerned. And if they all ask for them back, which certainly my club, Brighton, but the club can't afford to pay it back to the owner. Chelsea can't afford to pay back Abramovich. I would even warrant that Newcastle would struggle to repay the £111 million back to Mike Ashley. And we don't know what's happening with that deal at present. So, it's a concern. There's asking for money back and there's being able to pay it back. And of course, you have to do the sort of the corporate equivalent of sending the boys round, which would be to appoint an administrator. And from your experiences, that's unpleasant for everybody concerned. It increases uncertainty. It means that there's job losses. So you've just got to hope that owners, and there's no evidence that this would be the case, owners seem to be aware of that. Owners' descendants, you're never quite sure.
But I'm surely, with the figures involved, these people are high-powered businessmen. They've got high-powered, as you say, silver-tongued friends. Would not some provision be made for that? These people will have resolved what will happen to their money after their death, presumably, wouldn't they? These are not the sort of people who are going to forget to sort of put something in the will about the loan they've made to the club.
Well, you would hope so, but that could be contested by one of the beneficiaries of the will.
Right, okay, that's good. That's a good question, Nobby. And our next question is, I believe, our first question from Saudi Arabia. It's from Farhad Al-Qadi. Apologies if I pronounce that wrongly, Farhad. If I did, I've just done it again. And also apologies if it's not the first question from Saudi Arabia. Basically, as soon as we finish these pods, they're gone. They don't lodge in my mind. So but I think it is our first question from Saudi Arabia. And it's a good question, albeit it got my blood up. Because Farhad's question is, how do you see the Premier League as a product post-Brexit? Would a no-deal Brexit affect the league and its overseas value? How could the league protect its value? Now, obviously, as a public service broadcaster, we can have no opinion on Brexit as such, but it turns out we're not a public service broadcaster, so I think Brexit's a terrible idea. No-deal Brexit even worse, although I do acknowledge it could be good for young British players. My wife Ali is a bit annoyed with Farhad because I was in a perfectly good mood this morning until I saw this question and it started me off about Brexit again. So anyway, we're not a public service broadcaster, although we've got the budget of one, so perhaps we should stay neutral. But sorry for the rant, Farhad. That's kind of there's a long gap between your question and the answer now. So basically, how would a no-deal Brexit affect the Premier League?
I think it would be relatively unaffected. Most of the value in the Premier League, and this sort of just follows on from what we've been talking about, comes from the big six clubs. They get 73% of matchday income. They've got 80% of commercial income. They grumble that they only get 45% of broadcasting, so that's why they're trying to adjust for that. So those clubs are going to be the clubs which are going to be least affected by the tariffs and by the complications in terms of recruitment when we move to a points-based system for recruitment of staff. I think it is the mid-tier clubs. It is the other 14 clubs in the Premier League who are recruiting from from Belgium, from Germany, from Italy, and so on, for players who are not necessarily internationals, but they're still good players, and those players are going to find it more difficult to be deemed to have sufficient points to be able to play for the club, and therefore there's going to be less diversity in terms of recruitment for, again, the likes of Bournemouth, Watford, Palace, Brighton, and so on.
Yeah.
The big six clubs are signing internationals, so therefore I can't see a problem for them. If we're honest about the value of the Premier League, it comes from the big six. So as it's the big six clubs which generate the eyeballs for TV viewers, it's the big six, and they do that both in the UK and overseas. Yes. It's the big six clubs which generate the big contracts for the commercial sponsors. I see that being unaffected. It's certainly going to be far more affected by COVID than it is by Brexit. My conclusion would be that the overall value of the Premier League is unlikely to fall.
Okay, that's interesting. Although, as I say, we do have to acknowledge that for young British players, it could be a good thing. But that's an interesting question, Farhad. Thank you for that. Now, we've got a little... how can I put it? I was going to say post-mortem. We've got a little post-match story to finish the pod with, but that's after our last question. And our last question is from Edward Leighton. And, like a lot of things I hear on this pod, initially, Kieran, I saw this question when it was sent through by Guy, and it's on the cusp. It's of genius and idiot, basically, like a lot of things on this pod. And I've come down on the side of genius because Edward Leighton has got an idea. And his idea is for saving the FA Cup. And, God knows the FA Cup does need something to get us all interested again. We know we've talked long and hard about the fading appeal of the FA Cup to a younger audience of football fans in particular. But Edward's idea is this: finish the league season earlier, get that out of the way, and then play all rounds of the FA Cup over consecutive weeks from March through to the final in May. Now, he wants to know whether that would financially make any sense. I mean, initially, I didn't think it made any sense football-wise, but I quite like the idea until inevitably, of course, Palace are knocked out in the third round and you lose all interest again, which is essentially what's happening to the FA Cup. The reason it's tarnished is because we can't win it anymore. Clubs we couldn't win it anyway, nor could Brighton, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, I think this one is intriguing, and it's got both pluses and minuses. Part of the reason why the FA Cup has lost its appeal is that you and I both know that when our sides play in the third round of the FA Cup, we're going to put out the substitutes bench, plus some of the youth team, and so on. Now, if the season ends in March, at the end of March, and we know what our league position is, then the manager doesn't have to worry about, well, I need to give the players a rest for the FA Cup because that season's gone. So therefore, from a competitive point of view, I think it would make the FA Cup more appealing because Palace would put out their first team.
Yeah.
Because the players have got nothing else to do. The part of the reason why clubs are putting out their weakened 11s is because the prize money in the Premier League is so incredible. We've often spoken about it's now worth £2.5 million per additional place. You get an extra 1.8 million for winning the FA Cup. Now, that's that. So the losers get 1.8 and the winners get 3.6. So you can see that if we get to the end of March, we know what our positions are. We can now go forward to the FA Cup, and I think it would certainly provide more focus for fans. What, however, would be the case if your club had just been relegated from the Premier League, and now they've got the prospect of having to play in the FA Cup? Will the players be bothered? Will the fans actually care? That's another issue. And I think from a planning point of view, it might give us a few problems. You and I, we both love football. The fact it is effectively 10 months of the year for us.
Yeah.
If we play the Premier League towards the end of March and we get knocked out in the third round, that's it.
Yeah.
With the best will in the world, when my club's out, I lose interest as a fan until perhaps it gets to the semi-finals. So it wouldn't necessarily be good from a fan's point of view, because then you've got April, May, June. You could have effectively an 8-month season, and perhaps that would actually be good for us. Perhaps I shouldn't be so obsessed by football, and I should spend more time with the Baroness and so on. I think it's an intriguing idea. I think it's got both pluses and minuses. But in terms of making the FA Cup more competitive, I think it's a stroke of genius.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, there you go. I said it was on the genius lunacy cusp, and so you've come down for genius as well. You could, of course, spend more time with the Baroness by watching football with her.
Yes, I could do, I guess. But she does. She's got a season ticket. She does sit next to me at home games.
Oh, I know what you got for Christmas. That's fine. Now, finally, to end this masterclass of mispronunciation that we've had for the last 45 minutes, we have a little story for you. Which consider this as a little treat. Consider this as a little digestif, if you like, or digestif, if you prefer. This is a free Calvados on the house after the end of the meal, just to help things go down a little bit. Now, because a lot of clubs, as we know, Kieran, think outside the box in order to raise money. So you've got your official drinks partners or mattress partners, or are proud to be linked with Malaysia's finest coffin maker. And it's just occurred to me that I shouldn't have chosen mattress partner as an example with you around, because it will almost inevitably lead into a story. But one team in the NFL have really used their imagination and thought properly outside the box, haven't they?
Yes, it's the San Francisco 49ers, and they have got an official under-the-waist sponsor in the form of a company called Manscaped. So I had to Google this, and apparently this is one of these shaving devices for men who want to tone their nether region. So you could say it's a ball sponsor of sorts. But
so you could say, Kieran, if you're a cricket fan, they're thinking inside the box.
Yes, but it's showing that the commercial departments are prepared to sign a deal with practically everyone. I don't know how they're going to do the advertising campaigns for it, but I'll leave it to them. But from a football perspective, we are seeing clubs these days have tie-ups with the likes of Nivea and Gillette and so on, and in terms of men's grooming products. So those have concentrated above the waist. So is this a lost opportunity for clubs in the Premier League?
Well, my worry is you talk about how they're going to advertise it. If even a man of the world like you is reluctant to use the words pubic hair and search for a euphemism, then it's going to be difficult for them to advertise. And also, the other thing that worries me is that I do make notes for this pod beforehand, and as we do, I jot some notes down as we're talking. I'm just worried now that Ali will come out and see the words Calvados and pubic hair ? written on a piece of paper and wonder what's going on. So it's good for them, but as you say, we see footballers regularly. We see Premier League footballers on TV adverts combing their hair and shaving. Are we looking forward to some unlucky 49ers player being shown on primetime television, manscaping, as you so politely put it?
I think there will be a few people tuning in just out of curiosity if that does take place. I used to be a barman in a club called the Pink Coconut in Brighton back in the early 80s, and my friend Clifford, who was Clifford had a rather unhealthy interest in me, given that I was underage at the time. He said to me, no matter what you do to testicles, ultimately you can never make them attractive. So I think there will be a challenge for this from a commercial and advertising perspective.
Well, yes, as to quote my friend Arthur Smith, the trouble with testicles is that they always look 20 years older than the rest of you, didn't they? So, I think I should have looked at more details of this question before we actually got into it Kieran. But it's bright in the mood, isn't it? And I noticed we pronounced every word correctly in this story, so that's all it takes to grab our attention is basically a story. Thank you for your questions this week. They've all been, as usual, fascinating, and they always lead us into great conversations. If you have a question for us, questions@priceoffootball.com is where you need to send it. We'll be back on Thursday when I guarantee one of our stories will be about the revelations of agents' fees in the Premier League, and we will be spending the next couple of days trying to find an agent who's going to be happy to talk about how much money they're taking out of the game. In the meantime, we enjoy what football we have coming up, FA Cup games today, because we're recording this on Sunday afternoon because of Kieran's incredible broadcasting schedule. Palace Burnley tomorrow night. We will talk again on Thursday. Kieran, take care. Pleasure as always.
Thank you. Stay safe, boys and girls.
Bye, everybody.
The price of football. The price of football.